Major Sarah Chen had seen the darkest corners of human nature during her 15 years as an FBI criminal profiler, but nothing had prepared her for what she would discover in the most unexpected place, an elementary school art classroom in suburban Virginia. What started as a quiet retirement from military intelligence would become the most important mission of her life, one that would expose a network of predators spanning 3 states and ultimately lead to the arrest of 47 individuals in a single coordinated week-long operation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's transition from the high-stakes world of federal law enforcement to teaching 10-year-olds seemed like stepping into an entirely different universe. After 2 decades of military service that included tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, followed by her specialized work with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, she thought she had earned some peace. The nightmares from profiling serial killers and tracking down the most dangerous criminals in America had finally started to fade. Teaching art to children was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place where innocence still existed and creativity could flourish without the shadow of human cruelty. But Sarah Chen was not a woman who could simply turn off 20 years of training. Her military background had taught her to observe, analyze, and trust her instincts. Her FBI experience had honed those skills to a razor's edge, teaching her to spot the subtle signs that others missed, the micro-expressions, the behavioral patterns, the inconsistencies that revealed hidden truths. Even in a classroom filled with finger paints and construction paper, those instincts remained as sharp as ever. It was a Tuesday morning in October when Sarah first noticed something wasn't right. Emma Rodriguez, one of her brightest students, had been unusually withdrawn for several weeks. The 8-year-old who once filled her drawings with vibrant rainbows and smiling families had begun creating increasingly dark artwork. Her latest piece showed a small figure hiding in what appeared to be a closet with menacing shadows reaching toward the door. When Sarah asked Emma about her drawing, the child's response chilled her to the bone. "Sometimes the monsters come when Mommy goes to work," Emma whispered, her small hands trembling as she set down her crayon. Sarah's military training kicked in immediately. She recognized the signs, the hypervigilance, the regression in behavior, the symbolic representation of trauma through art. But this wasn't a battlefield or a crime scene. This was an elementary school, and she had to tread carefully. One wrong move could not only jeopardize Emma's safety, but potentially alert whoever was harming her. Over the next few days, Sarah began conducting what she privately called reconnaissance missions during her classes. She observed not just Emma, but all of her students, looking for patterns, connections, anything that might indicate other children were at risk. Her FBI profiler instincts, dormant but never truly silenced, began to awaken. She started keeping detailed notes, documenting behavioral changes, recording concerning artwork, and tracking which children seemed to know each other outside of school. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Emma wasn't the only child showing signs of abuse. 3 other students in her Tuesday-Thursday classes, Marcus, age 7, Lily, age 9, and twins Jake and James, both 8, were displaying similar symptoms. Their artwork had become increasingly disturbing, filled with shadowy figures, locked doors, and children who appeared trapped or hiding. More concerning still, when Sarah carefully questioned them about their drawings, their responses suggested they might all be connected to the same group of adults. Sarah's investigation took on new urgency when she overheard Emma talking to Marcus during free drawing time. "Is Mr. Kevin coming to your house this weekend too?" Emma asked innocently. "Mommy says we're having another special party and that we need to be good helpers again." The mention of special parties and being good helpers sent immediate alarm bells through Sarah's mind. During her FBI years, she had worked cases involving organized child exploitation rings, and she recognized the coded language predators often use to normalize abuse in children's minds. The fact that multiple children seemed to be involved suggested this wasn't an isolated case of individual abuse. This was something much larger and more organized. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment surrounded by photocopies of her students' artwork and pages of behavioral notes. Her military medals and FBI commendations hung on the wall behind her, silent reminders of a life dedicated to protecting others. She knew she was looking at evidence of what could be a significant child trafficking operation, but she also knew she couldn't simply call her former colleagues at the Bureau. Not yet. She needed more evidence, and she needed to be absolutely certain before she put these children at risk by alerting the wrong people. Sarah made a decision that night that would change everything. She was going to conduct her own investigation using every skill she had learned in 2 decades of military and federal service. But this time, the stakes weren't national security or stopping a serial killer. This time, she was fighting to save children who couldn't save themselves, and she would use whatever means necessary to bring down every single person involved in harming them.
The next morning, Sarah arrived at Riverside Elementary with a carefully constructed plan. Her years in military intelligence had taught her the importance of building a network of trusted sources, and she knew she needed allies if she was going to uncover the full scope of what appeared to be an organized abuse ring. But in a school environment, she had to be extraordinarily careful about who she could trust. Her first strategic move was to approach Janet Walsh, the school's veteran nurse. Janet had been at Riverside for over 20 years and had a reputation for being both discreet and fiercely protective of the children in her care. If anyone would have noticed patterns of behavior or suspicious injuries among the students, it would be her. "Janet, I need to ask you something in confidence," Sarah began, closing the nurse's office door behind her. "Have you noticed anything unusual about some of our students lately? Behavioral changes, unexplained injuries, anything that might suggest problems at home?" Janet's expression immediately grew serious. As a school nurse, she was a mandated reporter and had dealt with suspected abuse cases before. But something in Sarah's tone suggested this conversation was different. "What exactly are you getting at, Sarah?" Sarah made a calculated decision to reveal part of her background. "Before I became a teacher, I worked in federal law enforcement. I specialized in, let's call it, pattern recognition, and I'm seeing patterns among several of our students that concern me deeply." Over the next 30 minutes, Sarah and Janet compared notes. What emerged was a disturbing picture that extended far beyond Sarah's initial observations. Janet had indeed noticed an uptick in behavioral issues among certain students over the past 6 months. Children who had previously been outgoing and social had become withdrawn and anxious. Several students had complained of stomach aches or other vague physical symptoms, classic signs of psychological stress manifesting physically. More troubling still, Janet revealed that 3 children, including Emma Rodriguez, had been brought to her office multiple times by their teachers for what appeared to be dissociative episodes. They would suddenly become unresponsive during class, staring blankly into space for minutes at a time before snapping back to awareness with no memory of what had happened. "I've been teaching for 15 years and working as a nurse for 8 more, Janet said quietly. "I've never seen anything like this pattern of symptoms across multiple unrelated children. Usually when we see signs of abuse, it's isolated cases. This feels coordinated." Sarah's military training had taught her the importance of intelligence gathering from multiple sources. Over the next several days, she began carefully cultivating relationships with other school staff members, always being cautious not to reveal too much about her suspicions or her background. She spoke with the school counselor, Mrs. Peterson, and learned that requests for individual counseling sessions had increased dramatically over the past 6 months. She chatted with several teachers during lunch breaks and discovered that at least 8 children across different grade levels had shown marked changes in behavior and academic performance. But it was her conversation with Tom Martinez, the school's maintenance supervisor, that provided the most crucial intelligence. Tom had worked at the school for 12 years and knew every family in the district. During a casual conversation about weekend plans, he mentioned something that made Sarah's blood freeze. "You know, it's funny, I've been noticing the same cars picking up different kids after school lately. Usually parents stick to picking up their own children, but I've seen that black SUV pick up the Rodriguez girl, the Thompson twins, and at least 3 other kids over the past few weeks. Sarah forced herself to maintain a casual tone. Maybe it's a carpool arrangement. Maybe, Tom shrugged. But it's weird because these families don't normally interact much. Different neighborhoods, different social circles, and the timing is odd too. Always on Fridays, always after most of the other kids have gone home. That Friday, Sarah positioned herself strategically in her classroom with a clear view of the pickup area. Sure enough, at 3:47 p.m., a black Chevrolet Suburban with tinted windows pulled into the circular drive. She watched as Emma Rodriguez, Marcus Thompson, and 2 other children she didn't immediately recognize climbed into the vehicle. The driver remained in the car, and she couldn't make out any details about who was behind the wheel. But her FBI training had taught her to notice details others missed. She carefully noted the license plate number, the model year of the vehicle, and even the distinctive dent on the rear bumper. More importantly, she observed the children's body language as they approached the SUV. None of them appeared excited or happy, the way children normally did when being picked up for a fun weekend activity. Instead, they moved slowly, almost reluctantly, with the resigned posture of children who had learned not to resist. That evening, Sarah made a decision that would officially begin her investigation. Using contacts she had maintained from her FBI days, she ran the license plate through the National Crime Information Center, and what she discovered made her realize that Emma Rodriguez and the other children were in far greater danger than she had initially suspected. The vehicle was registered to Kevin Morrison, a 34-year-old with a criminal history that included arrests for possession of child pornography and solicitation of minors. More disturbing still, Morrison's address was linked to a residential property that had been flagged by multiple law enforcement agencies as a suspected location for organized criminal activity, though no charges had ever been filed due to insufficient evidence. Sarah stared at her computer screen, her hands trembling slightly as the full implications sank in. This wasn't just child abuse. This was a trafficking operation, and somehow multiple children from her school were being systematically transported to a known predator's location every Friday afternoon. The special parties Emma had mentioned weren't innocent gatherings. They were organized abuse sessions. For the first time since leaving the FBI, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with a major case break. But this time, the stakes were more personal than any case she had ever worked. These weren't anonymous victims in a file. These were children she saw every day, children who trusted her, children who depended on the adults in their lives to keep them safe. She reached for her secure phone and began making the first become dozens of calls to former colleagues. It was time to bring the full weight of federal law enforcement down on Kevin Morrison and whoever else was involved in this operation. But she would have to be careful. One wrong move could alert the perpetrators and put the children in even greater danger.
Sarah's first call was to Special Agent Maria Santos, her former partner in the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Maria had worked child exploitation cases for over a decade and would understand both the urgency of the situation and the delicate approach required to protect the victims while gathering evidence. "Sarah, I haven't heard from you since your retirement party 2 years ago." Maria's voice carried surprise and warmth. "How's the teaching life treating you?" "Maria, I need your help. I think I've stumbled onto something big and I can't handle it alone." Sarah's voice was steady, but Maria immediately recognized the tone she used during active investigations. Over the next hour, Sarah laid out everything she had discovered, the behavioral changes in the children, their disturbing artwork, the conversations she had overheard, and, most critically, the connection to Kevin Morrison and the suspicious Friday pickups. Maria listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. "Jesus, Sarah,
You've stumbled onto what sounds like an organized trafficking ring operating right under everyone's noses. But we have a problem. Everything you've told me is observational. We don't have any direct evidence of abuse, no testimony from victims, and no physical evidence of crimes being committed." Sarah had anticipated this challenge. Her years in federal law enforcement had taught her the difference between suspicion and prosecutable evidence. "I know we need more. That's why I'm calling you. I need to set up surveillance on Morrison's property and the vehicle, but I can't do it alone. And if this is as organized as I suspect, we're going to need a full task force to take it down properly." "The problem is jurisdiction," Maria explained. "You're looking at potential violations of federal trafficking statutes, but the local field office will need to take the lead on initial surveillance. And they're going to want more than behavioral observations before they commit resources to what could be a weeks-long investigation." This was the moment Sarah had been dreading. To convince the FBI to open a formal investigation, she would need to provide more concrete evidence. But gathering that evidence would require her to put herself and potentially the children at greater risk. "Sarah, what if I could provide you with photographic evidence of the children being transported to Morrison's location? And what if I could document other adults involved in this operation?" "Sarah, you're not an agent anymore. You can't conduct your own surveillance operation. It's too dangerous, and anything you gather might not be admissible in court." But Sarah's military background had taught her to think tactically, even in civilian situations. "I'm not talking about conducting an unauthorized investigation. I'm talking about being a concerned teacher who happens to notice things while going about her normal activities. There's nothing illegal about a citizen observing activities in public spaces." Over the next several days, Sarah began what she privately called Operation Guardian Angel. Using techniques she had learned during her military intelligence training, she established surveillance patterns around both the school and Morrison's neighborhood. She varied her routes home from work, sometimes taking the long way that happened to pass by Morrison's address. She began volunteering for after-school activities that allowed her to observe pickup patterns more systematically. Her breakthrough came the following Friday when she followed the black SUV at a safe distance. Morrison's property was a large, isolated house on 5 acres of wooded land, perfect for concealing illegal activities. But what she observed that afternoon exceeded her worst fears. Through high-powered binoculars positioned from a public park nearly half a mile away, Sarah watched as the SUV arrived at Morrison's house at approximately 4:15 p.m. But it wasn't the only vehicle. 2 other cars were already parked in the circular driveway, a white sedan and a red pickup truck. Over the course of the next hour, Sarah documented the arrival of 4 additional vehicles, including a van that appeared to be carrying more children. Using her military training in reconnaissance photography, Sarah captured clear images of license plates, vehicle descriptions, and, most crucially, photographs of adults escorting children into Morrison's house. Her telephoto lens revealed details that made her stomach turn. Several of the children appeared to be even younger than her elementary school students, and their body language suggested fear and resignation, rather than excitement about a social gathering. But the most shocking discovery came when Sarah recognized one of the adults directing the children into the house. It was Principal Robert Hayes, from Riverside Elementary, the man responsible for the safety and welfare of over 400 children, including Emma Rodriguez and the other victims Sarah had identified. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just an external threat targeting students from her school. The operation was being facilitated from within the school system itself. Principal Hayes had access to student records, family information, and the trust of both parents and children. He would know which families were vulnerable, which children might be targeted, and how to identify potential victims while maintaining his cover as a respected educator. Sarah's hands shook as she lowered her binoculars. The scope of this conspiracy was far larger than she had initially suspected. If the principal was involved, there was no telling how many other school officials, teachers, or staff members might be part of the network. More terrifying still, Hayes's position would give him the power to silence or discredit anyone who began asking uncomfortable questions, including her. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment reviewing the photographs she had taken, cross-referencing license plates with vehicle registration databases, and building what would become a comprehensive intelligence package. She now had photographic evidence of what appeared to be an organized child trafficking operation, documented involvement of school officials, and a clear pattern of systematic abuse targeting vulnerable students. But she also realized she was now in significant personal danger. If Hayes suspected that someone was investigating the operation, he would have both the motivation and the resources to silence them. Her military training had taught her that gathering intelligence was only valuable if you survived long enough to act on it. Sarah made a decision that would accelerate everything. It was time to bring in federal authorities, even if it meant risking the investigation by moving before they had identified all participants in the network. The children's safety had to prioritize over building a perfect case. She reached for her secure phone and began dialing Maria Santos's emergency number. In 6 hours, this would become the largest coordinated child trafficking investigation in Virginia's history.
Special Agent Maria Santos answered her emergency line on the second ring, immediately recognizing the secure number from her former partner's phone. But nothing could have prepared her for what Sarah was about to reveal. "Maria, I need an emergency response team and I need them tonight." Sarah's voice was controlled but urgent. "The situation is far worse than we initially discussed. I have photographic evidence of organized child trafficking, and one of the perpetrators is the principal of the elementary school where I teach." The line went silent for several seconds. Maria had worked dozens of child exploitation cases, but the involvement of school officials always represented a worst-case scenario. "Sarah, are you in a secure location? And please tell me you haven't compromised yourself by getting too close to this operation." "I'm secure for now, but Maria, we have a problem. If Principal Hayes is involved, he has access to student records for over 400 children. He knows their family situations, their vulnerabilities, their schedules, and he's in a position to identify and groom potential victims while maintaining complete credibility with parents and local law enforcement." Sarah quickly transmitted the photograph she had taken to Maria's secure server, along with her detailed notes about behavioral observations, vehicle information, and timeline documentation. As Maria reviewed the evidence, her training kicked in, and she began coordinating what would become the largest multi-agency child protection operation in Virginia history. "Sarah, this is federal jurisdiction, interstate trafficking, organized criminal enterprise, exploitation of minors. I'm bringing in the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, but we need to move carefully. If Hayes suspects we're onto him, he could either eliminate evidence or, worse, harm the children to prevent them from testifying." Within 6 hours, a covert command post had been established at the FBI's Richmond field office. Special Agent Santos led a team of 12 federal agents, including specialists in child psychology, digital forensics, and undercover operations. But the centerpiece of the operation was Sarah herself. Her unique combination of military intelligence training, FBI profiling experience, and current access to the school environment made her invaluable as both an intelligence asset and an undercover operative. Assistant Special Agent in Charge David Rodriguez briefed the team on the operational parameters. "We're calling this Operation Guardian Shield. Our primary objectives are threefold: identify and rescue all victims, arrest all perpetrators, and dismantle the entire trafficking network. But our first priority is always child safety. We cannot risk alerting the suspects until we have a comprehensive plan to protect every child involved." Sarah found herself in the strange position of being both a civilian consultant and a key operational asset. Her military clearance had never been revoked, and her FBI credentials could be reactivated for the duration of the investigation. More importantly, her position at the school provided unparalleled access to intelligence that would be impossible to gather through traditional surveillance methods. The team's first major breakthrough came when digital forensic specialists analyzed the metadata from Sarah's photographs. The telephoto images she had captured contained enough detail to identify not only the license plates of all vehicles at Morrison's property, but also partial facial recognition matches for several adults entering and leaving the house. Agent Lisa Park, the team's digital forensic specialist, presented her findings to the group. We've identified 12 adults who appear to be part of this network, including Morrison and Principal Hayes. But more significantly, we've discovered that this operation extends beyond just one location. Cell phone tower data suggests coordinated communications between participants across a 3-state area: Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina. The scope of the investigation was expanding rapidly. What Sarah had initially discovered as abuse affecting a few children in her classroom was now revealed to be part of a multi-state trafficking ring that potentially involved dozens of victims and perpetrators. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team was joined by agents from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, U.S. Marshal Service, and local law enforcement from 3 states. Sarah's role in the expanding investigation became even more critical when the team realized they needed real-time intelligence from inside the school. Principal Hayes' access to student information meant that traditional surveillance methods would be insufficient. They needed someone who could observe his daily activities, monitor his interactions with students and staff, and potentially gather evidence of how victims were being identified and recruited. Sarah, we're asking you to do something extremely dangerous, Agent Rodriguez explained during a secure briefing. We need you to continue your normal teaching duties while essentially conducting an undercover investigation of your own principal. You'll be wearing a wire, documenting conversations, and potentially gathering evidence that could put you in direct danger if Hayes becomes suspicious. The weight of the request settled over Sarah like a familiar burden. This was the kind of mission she had trained for during her military career: high stakes, dangerous, with the safety of innocent lives hanging in the balance. But this time, she wouldn't have backup immediately available, and the targets weren't enemy combatants in a war zone. They were people she worked with every day, people who had gained her trust and the trust of hundreds of families. I understand the risks, Sarah replied, but these children can't wait for us to build a perfect case. Every day we delay is another day they're being harmed. I'm willing to go undercover, but I need your assurance that we'll have rescue teams ready to move the moment we have enough evidence to make arrests. Over the next 48 hours, Sarah underwent intensive preparation for her undercover role. FBI technical specialist fitted her with state-of-the-art recording equipment, a nearly invisible microphone woven into her clothing, and a backup audio recorder concealed in her school supplies. She was given a panic button disguised as a pen and emergency communication protocols that would bring a SWAT response within minutes. But perhaps most importantly, child psychologists briefed her on how to interact with the victim children without compromising the investigation. She needed to continue documenting their behavioral changes and gather intelligence about their experiences, but she could not ask direct questions or take any actions that might alert Principal Hayes to her suspicions. Remember, Dr. Jennifer Walsh explained, the team's child psychologist, these children are likely experiencing severe trauma, but they may not even realize they're being victimized. Predators are experts at normalizing abuse and convincing children that what's happening to them is either normal or their fault. You need to be prepared for the possibility that some of these children have been conditioned to protect their abusers. Monday morning arrived with Sarah walking back into Riverside Elementary as both a teacher and an undercover federal operative. Her military training had taught her to compartmentalize stress and focus on mission objectives. But as she passed Principal Hayes in the hallway and exchanged pleasantries about the upcoming week, she felt the familiar adrenaline surge that came with high-stakes operations. "Good morning, Sarah," he said, with the same friendly smile he had worn for the past 2 years. "How was your weekend? You look like you're ready to tackle a new week with the kids."
Sarah forced herself to maintain normal behavior, even as every instinct screamed that she was standing next to a predator who was systematically harming the children they both were supposed to protect. It was relaxing, thanks. I'm looking forward to working on some new art projects with the kids. Actually, I wanted to ask you about field trip protocols. I'm thinking about taking some of my students to the new Children's Museum downtown. It was a calculated question designed to gauge Hayes's response to the idea of taking children off campus. His reaction would help the FBI team understand how the trafficking operation identified and isolated potential victims. Hayes's expression changed subtly, and Sarah's FBI training allowed her to catch the micro-expression of calculation that flashed across his face before he responded. That sounds like a wonderful idea. Why don't you come by my office later today and we can discuss which students might benefit most from that kind of educational experience? Sarah's blood ran cold. The way Hayes phrased his response, suggesting they select specific students rather than taking an entire class, strongly suggested he was already mentally identifying children who could be targeted. She maintained her pleasant demeanor while her concealed recording equipment captured every word of the conversation. That sounds perfect. I'll stop by around 3 o'clock after the students have been dismissed. As Hayes walked away, Sarah realized that the investigation had just entered its most dangerous phase. She was now actively engaging with a suspected child trafficker, gathering evidence that could save dozens of children, but also putting herself in potentially lethal danger if her true identity was discovered.
Sarah's meeting with Principal Hayes that afternoon would become one of the most crucial pieces of evidence in Operation Guardian Shield. As she walked toward his office at exactly 3 p.m., her concealed recording equipment was capturing not just audio, but also her elevated heart rate and stress indicators that would later help FBI analysts understand the psychological pressure she was under during the investigation. Hayes's office was decorated with typical administrative trappings: educational awards, photographs with community leaders, and inspirational posters about childhood development. But Sarah's trained eye noticed details that others might miss: the unusually sophisticated computer setup with multiple monitors, the heavy-duty filing cabinets with additional security locks, and most tellingly, a collection of framed photographs showing Hayes at various school events, always positioned close to children, always with his hands on their shoulders or around their waist. "Please, have a seat," Hayes gestured to a chair positioned directly across from his desk. Sarah noticed that the seating arrangement gave him a clear view of her while keeping his own back to a wall, a defensive positioning that suggested either paranoia or experience with interrogation situations. "So, tell me about this museum trip idea," Hayes began, his tone friendly but his eyes calculating. "Which students were you thinking of taking?" Sarah had prepared for this question with the FBI team, understanding that Hayes was likely looking for signs that she might be identifying vulnerable children for reasons other than education. "I was thinking about some of my students who seem to be struggling lately. Emma Rodriguez has been particularly withdrawn, and I thought exposing her to some new experiences might help her open up. Marcus Thompson and the Johnson twins have also been having some behavioral challenges that might benefit from a change of scenery." Hayes's reaction was immediate and telling. He leaned forward slightly, and Sarah caught the brief flash of interest in his eyes when she mentioned Emma Rodriguez specifically. "Emma Rodriguez," he repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, she's been having some difficulties lately. Her mother works long hours, and I believe there have been some family stressors that might be affecting her performance." The way Hayes paused before saying family stressors sent chills down Sarah's spine. Her FBI training had taught her to recognize the coded language predators used to justify their targeting of vulnerable children. Hayes was essentially confirming that Emma's family situation had been analyzed and identified as exploitable. "Have you spoken with her mother about these issues?" Sarah asked, testing to see how much contact Hayes had with Emma's family. "Oh yes, Mrs. Rodriguez and I have had several conversations about Emma's needs. In fact, she's been very cooperative with some special programs we've arranged to help Emma with her adjustment challenges. Sometimes children from single-parent households need additional support structures, if you know what I mean. Sarah's military background had taught her to maintain composure under pressure, but hearing Hayes discuss Emma's exploitation with such clinical detachment while presenting it as educational support required every ounce of her self-control. The recording equipment was capturing everything, but she needed to gather more specific information about how the trafficking operation functioned. "What kind of special programs?" she asked, keeping her tone curious rather than suspicious. Hayes studied her for a moment, and Sarah realized he was evaluating whether she might be someone who could be recruited into the operation or whether she posed a potential threat. "Well, there are community mentorship programs where successful adults volunteer their time to provide additional guidance and support for at-risk children. Some of our students have benefited tremendously from these intensive guidance sessions." The euphemisms were becoming more transparent, and Sarah recognized that Hayes was essentially describing the trafficking operation while using language that would sound innocent to anyone not trained to recognize predatory patterns. But she needed more specific information: names, locations, timing, anything that would help the FBI identify other victims and perpetrators. "That sounds wonderful. Are there other teachers involved in identifying students who might benefit from these programs?" Sarah asked, probing to understand how many school staff members might be complicit in the operation. "Actually, that's something I handle directly. It requires a certain sensitivity to family dynamics and child psychology that not everyone possesses. But I've been thinking that someone with your background might be particularly suited to help identify children who could benefit from additional support." Sarah's blood froze. Hayes was recruiting her. His comment about someone with your background suggested he had researched her history and believed her FBI experience might make her valuable to the trafficking operation. The irony was staggering. He was trying to recruit the very person who was working to bring him down. "I'd be interested in learning more about how I could help," Sarah replied, carefully, knowing that appearing too eager might raise suspicions, but also recognizing this as an opportunity to gather crucial intelligence. Hayes smiled, and for the first time, Sarah saw the predatory calculation behind his friendly facade. "Excellent! Why don't you join me this Friday afternoon for a meeting with some of our community partners? We'll be discussing expansion of the program, and your insights would be valuable. The meeting is at 4 p.m. at a private residence where we can speak more freely about sensitive topics involving the children." Sarah realized that Hayes was inviting her to Morrison's house, the same location where she had photographed the trafficking activities. This was both an incredible intelligence opportunity and potentially a death trap. If Hayes suspected her true identity, he might be luring her to a location where she could be eliminated. "That sounds very educational," Sarah replied. "Should I bring anything specific to the meeting?" "Just an open mind and a commitment to helping children who need special attention. I'll give you the address before Friday. And Sarah, I hope I can trust your discretion about these programs. Not everyone understands the complex needs of troubled children, and some people might misinterpret our efforts to provide additional guidance and support." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Hayes was warning her not to discuss the programs with anyone, while also gauging whether she would comply with demands for secrecy, a standard predator tactic for ensuring victim and accomplice silence. "Of course," Sarah nodded. "I understand that sensitive work with children requires appropriate confidentiality." As she left Hayes' office, Sarah felt like she had just survived a psychological warfare session. The man she had worked alongside for 2 years, who had been trusted with the safety of hundreds of children, had just tried to recruit her into a child trafficking ring while threatening her if she revealed information about their conversation.
But more importantly, she now had recorded evidence of Hayes' involvement, specific details about how victims were selected and groomed, and confirmation that the Friday meetings at Morrison's house were central to the trafficking operation. The FBI team would have everything they need to obtain warrants, coordinate rescue operations, and begin making arrests. That evening, Sarah sat in the FBI command post reviewing the recording with the investigative team. Agent Santos played back Hayes' most damaging statements, while digital forensic specialists analyzed voice stress patterns and linguistic markers that would help prosecutors prove intent and criminal conspiracy. Sarah, you've just provided us with enough evidence to bring down the entire network, Agent Rodriguez told her. But we have a problem. Hayes is expecting you at Morrison's house on Friday, and we need to decide whether to arrest him now or use this opportunity to gather additional evidence and identify more perpetrators. Sarah understood the dilemma. Arresting Hayes immediately would protect the children from further harm, but it might also allow other members of the trafficking ring to escape justice. But attending the Friday meeting would put her in extreme personal danger while potentially exposing more victims to continued abuse. How many children are we talking about? Sarah asked. Agent Park consulted her latest intelligence analysis. Based on your observations, vehicle tracking, and communication intercepts, we've identified at least 15 children who appeared to be active victims, with possibly twice that many who have been victimized over the past 2 years. But if this network extends to other schools or communities, the number could be much higher. Sarah's military training had taught her that mission success sometimes required accepting personal risk to achieve larger objectives. I'll go to the Friday meeting, she decided, but I want rescue teams positioned within immediate response range, and I want every child we've identified to be taken into protective custody the moment we have enough evidence to make arrests. Agent Rodriguez nodded grimly. We'll have tactical teams ready to respond within 60 seconds of your signal. But Sarah, you need to understand that if Hayes realizes you're working with us, there's a real possibility that you might not survive long enough for us to reach you. Sarah looked around the room at the dozens of agents and analysts working to save children who couldn't save themselves, and she felt the familiar resolve that had carried her through 20 years of military and federal service. I've been in dangerous situations before, but I've never had a mission more important than this one. Those children are depending on us to get this right, and I won't let them down.
The 72 hours between Sarah's meeting with Principal Hayes and the planned Friday operation became the most intensive investigation period in FBI Richmond Field Office history. Agent Santos coordinated with federal prosecutors to prepare arrest warrants for 12 individuals based on the evidence Sarah had gathered, while tactical teams ran detailed simulations of rescue operations at Morrison's property. Sarah continued her normal teaching schedule, but every interaction with Hayes was now fraught with psychological warfare. He began checking in with her more frequently, asking casual questions about her weekend plans and family situation that she recognized as intelligence gathering. Her FBI training allowed her to provide responses that seemed natural while revealing nothing that could compromise the operation. On Wednesday morning, Hayes approached her during lunch break with additional details about the Friday meeting. I wanted to give you the address for our community partner meeting, he said, handing her a piece of paper with Morrison's address. And I thought you should know that some of the children we've been working with will be joining us to demonstrate the progress they've made in the program. Sarah's heart sank. The presence of children at Friday's meeting would make any rescue operation exponentially more dangerous. Tactical teams would need to account for potential young hostages, while also ensuring that traumatized children weren't further harmed during what would likely be a violent confrontation with armed traffickers. That's wonderful, Sarah managed to respond. Will their parents be there as well? Hayes' smile had a predatory edge. The parents have given their full permission for the children to participate in these intensive development sessions. In fact, many of them are grateful that we've found ways to help their children learn important life skills while giving the family some respite from childcare responsibilities. The coded language was becoming more transparent as Hayes tested Sarah's reactions to increasingly explicit descriptions of the trafficking operation.
He was describing parents who were either complicit in selling access to their children or who had been manipulated into believing that sending their children to special programs was beneficial. That evening, the FBI command post looked like a military war room. Digital maps of Morrison's property covered the walls, with tactical approach routes, emergency extraction points, and communication relay positions marked in detail. Agent Rodriguez briefed the combined federal and local law enforcement teams that would execute what was being called the largest coordinated child rescue operation in Virginia history. Operation Guardian Shield will commence at 15:45 hours on Friday, Rodriguez announced to the assembled team. Agent Chen will be inside the target location gathering final intelligence while wearing full recording equipment and emergency transponders. Our primary objectives remain unchanged: rescue all victims, arrest all perpetrators, and preserve evidence for prosecution. Sarah sat in the briefing studying satellite photographs of Morrison's property and memorizing every detail that might be crucial during the operation. Her military experience had taught her that survival often depended on preparation and situational awareness, but she had never been in a situation where she was walking voluntarily into a location controlled by people who would likely kill her if they discovered her true identity. Dr. Walsh, the FBI's child psychologist, provided additional briefing on what Sarah might encounter when she arrived at Morrison's house. Based on our analysis of similar trafficking operations, the children present will likely be in various states of psychological conditioning. Some may have been drugged to ensure compliance. Others may have been psychologically manipulated to believe they are willing participants. You may witness activities that will be extremely disturbing, but you must remember that your primary mission is intelligence gathering, not immediate intervention. The weight of that instruction was almost unbearable. Sarah would potentially have to watch children being abused while maintaining her cover and gathering evidence, knowing that premature action could result in the deaths of both the children and herself. Friday morning arrived with Sarah following her normal routine, teaching her regular art classes while preparing mentally for what might be the most dangerous mission of her career. Emma Rodriguez was in her second period class, and Sarah found herself studying the little girl's face, wondering what traumas she had endured, and promising silently that this would be Emma's last day as a victim. "Mrs. Chen, are you okay?" Emma asked during free drawing time. "You look sad." Sarah knelt down beside Emma's desk, fighting back tears as she realized this might be one of her last normal interactions with any of her students. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about how proud I am of all the progress you've made in art class." Emma smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from her in months. "I like drawing happy pictures now instead of scary ones." "That's wonderful, Emma. Keep drawing happy pictures, okay?" At 3:30 p.m., Sarah left Riverside Elementary and drove to a staging area where FBI technical specialists made final adjustments to her recording equipment and emergency communication devices. Agent Santos provided last-minute intelligence updates and emergency protocols. Remember, your code word for immediate extraction is hurricane. The moment you say that word, tactical teams will breach the location within 60 seconds. But Sarah, you need to understand that once you give the signal, there's no going back. We'll be committing to a full assault that will likely result in gunfire and potential casualties. Sarah nodded, understanding that the decision of when to call for rescue would rest entirely on her judgment. Too early, and they might not gather enough evidence to ensure convictions for all perpetrators. Too late, and she might not survive to make the call. At 3:50 p.m., Sarah pulled into Morrison's driveway, noting the same vehicles she had photographed during her surveillance, plus 2 additional cars she didn't recognize. Her concealed cameras began recording automatically as she approached the front door, documenting every detail that would later become evidence in what prosecutors would call the most comprehensive child trafficking case in federal court history. Principal Hayes opened the door with the same friendly smile he had worn throughout their 2-year working relationship. "Sarah, welcome. I'm so glad you could join us today. Come in and meet our community partner." As Sarah stepped across the threshold into Morrison's house, she was walking into the heart of a trafficking operation that had destroyed dozens of young lives. But she was also carrying with her the combined expertise of 20 years in military intelligence and federal law enforcement, along with the technological resources of multiple federal agencies and the tactical support of elite rescue teams.
The final phase of Operation Guardian Shield was about to begin, and within 6 hours, the largest child trafficking network in Virginia's history would be completely dismantled. But first, Sarah had to survive long enough to gather the evidence that would ensure justice for every child who had been victimized by the monsters masquerading as educators and community leaders.
The interior of Morrison's house was a study in calculated dissection. The main living areas appeared normal: comfortable furniture, family photographs, children's artwork displayed on the refrigerator. But Sarah's trained eye immediately noticed the security modifications: reinforced door frames, blackout curtains on all windows, and a sophisticated electronic surveillance system that wouldn't be found in a typical suburban home. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet our community partners," Hayes said, guiding her toward a group of 4 adults gathered in the living room. Sarah recognized Morrison from her surveillance photographs, but the other 3 were new faces that her concealed recording equipment was now documenting for the FBI's identification systems. Morrison stepped forward with an unsettling smile. "Miss Chen, Robert has told us so much about your background and your interest in helping troubled children. We're always looking for qualified professionals who understand the complex needs of vulnerable youth." Sarah's FBI training allowed her to recognize the coded language immediately, but she maintained her cover while gathering crucial intelligence. "I appreciate being included. Robert mentioned that you work with children who need intensive guidance and support." A woman introduced as Dr. Patricia Vance nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly right. We provide specialized therapeutic interventions for children who have experienced trauma or who come from unstable home environments. Our methods are quite intensive and require complete confidentiality, but the results can be transformative." Sarah realized that Vance was likely the operation's psychological manipulation specialist, responsible for conditioning children to accept abuse as therapy. The clinical terminology was designed to make the trafficking sound like legitimate mental health treatment, allowing participants to rationalize their crimes as helping vulnerable children. "What kind of therapeutic approaches do you use?" Sarah asked, knowing that the answer would provide crucial evidence for prosecutors. "We believe in immersive therapy," replied a man introduced as Dr. James Foster. "Children learn best through direct experience and personal attention from caring adults. We create safe spaces where children can explore their emotions and learn to trust authoritative figures who have their best interests at heart." The euphemisms were becoming increasingly transparent, and Sarah's recording equipment was capturing every word. But her military training was also alerting her to potential dangers. The adults in the room were positioning themselves strategically, blocking her access to exits while subtly surrounding her. Either they were naturally cautious or they suspected something about her true identity. "Where are the children Robert mentioned would be here today?" Sarah asked, needing to locate potential victims while also testing whether the traffickers trusted her enough to reveal their full operation. Hayes and Morrison exchanged a glance that Sarah's FBI training allowed her to interpret as communication about whether to proceed with showing her the trafficking activities. "They're in our specialized therapy rooms downstairs," Hayes finally said. "But before we introduce you to them, we need to discuss confidentiality agreements and your willingness to fully participate in our therapeutic approaches." Sarah's pulse quickened. The mention of children being held in basement rooms confirmed her worst fears about the scope of the trafficking operation. But the traffickers were also clearly testing her. They wanted to ensure she would become complicit before exposing her to evidence that could destroy them. "I appreciate being included. Robert mentioned that you work with children who need intensive guidance and support." Dr. Vance pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be legal documents. "We require all community partners to sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements, but more importantly, we need to know that you're committed to our therapeutic philosophy and willing to engage directly with the children under our guidance." Sarah realized she was being asked to sign documents that would make her legally complicit in the trafficking operation, while also agreeing to participate in abuse activities. This was the moment of maximum danger. If she signed the documents, she would become legally vulnerable, but if she refused, the traffickers would know she was not a willing participant and would likely view her as a threat. Her concealed panic button was within reach, but calling for immediate extraction would mean potentially sacrificing the children who were somewhere in the basement of Morrison's house.
Sarah made a calculated decision that would either save those children or result in her death. I'd like to meet the children first to better understand how I can help them. Once I see the therapeutic environment and understand the children's needs, I'll be in a better position to make a full commitment to your program. The request was reasonable enough that refusing would seem suspicious, but it also meant the traffickers would have to reveal the location and condition of their victims. Morrison hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with showing their operation to someone who hadn't yet proven her willingness to participate. Our therapeutic sessions are quite intensive. Some people find our methods surprising, especially if they're not familiar with trauma recovery approaches for severely damaged children. Sarah recognized this as both a warning and a test. Morrison was telling her she was about to see children being abused, while also gauging whether she would react in a way that suggested she was an undercover investigator rather than a potential accomplice. I've worked with traumatized children in various contexts, Sarah replied, drawing on her FBI experience with child victims. I understand that recovery sometimes requires approaches that might seem unconventional to people without specialized training. Hayes made the decision. All right, let's show her the therapy rooms. But Sarah, I need you to understand that what you're about to see is strictly confidential. These children have made tremendous progress under our care, but their therapeutic needs require absolute privacy and protection from outside interference. As the group moved toward a staircase leading to the basement, Sarah activated her emergency transponder, sending a silent signal to the FBI tactical teams that she was about to encounter victims and would likely need immediate extraction within minutes. The signal would alert the rescue teams to begin moving into position, but the final decision about when to breach the house would still rest with her judgment. The basement of Morrison's house had been converted into what could only be described as a sophisticated child imprisonment facility. Multiple rooms with reinforced doors, surveillance cameras in every corner, and soundproofing that would prevent anyone outside from hearing what happened in the basement. But most horrifying were the children. Sarah counted at least 8 children ranging in age from approximately 6 to 12 years old. Some were sitting quietly in what appeared to be a common area, their expressions blank and resigned. Others were in individual rooms, and Sarah could see through reinforced glass windows that several appeared to be drugged or sedated. But Emma Rodriguez was among them, sitting in a corner and drawing pictures with the same mechanical repetition Sarah had observed in her art class. But when Emma looked up and saw Sarah, her expression changed from blank resignation to confusion and hope. Miss Chen, are you here to take us home? The innocent question shattered Sarah's composure, but it also revealed that the children hadn't been told she was joining the trafficking operation as a participant. They still saw her as their teacher, their protector, someone who might rescue them. Morrison quickly intervened. Emma, remember what we discussed about interrupting adult conversations. Miss Chen is here to learn about your therapy program so she can help other children who need the same kind of special attention. Sarah realized that her presence was being used to further manipulate the children, convincing them that their abuse was sanctioned by trusted authority figures like their teachers. The psychological damage was as devastating as the physical abuse, and she knew that even after rescue, these children would require years of legitimate therapy to recover. But she also realized that she now had everything the FBI needed for a successful prosecution: recorded evidence of the trafficking operation, positive identification in multiple victims, documentation of the facility where children were being held, and recorded admissions from multiple perpetrators. The moment had come to save these children, even if it meant risking her own life. Sarah looked directly at Emma and said quietly, "Yes, sweetheart, I'm here to take you home, and there's going to be a hurricane coming through very soon."
The code word, hurricane, had barely left Sarah's lips when she heard the unmistakable sound of tactical vehicles surrounding Morrison's property. Within her concealed earpiece, Agent Santos's voice was calm but urgent. "Guardian shield is in motion. Stay down and protect the children. We'll be inside in 30 seconds. The traffickers' reactions were immediate and telling. Morrison lunged toward a wall panel that Sarah realized contained an alarm system, while Hayes grabbed Emma Rodriguez and pulled her against him as a human shield.
Dr. Vance began shouting instructions to the other adults about destroying evidence, confirming that they had protocols in place for law enforcement raids. "You're a fucking cop," Morrison screamed at Sarah, finally abandoning the pretense of being a legitimate community partner. "I knew something was wrong about you from the beginning." Sarah's military training kicked in as she assessed the tactical situation. 8 children in immediate danger, 4 armed adults who were now desperate and had nothing to lose, and FBI tactical teams that would breach the building within seconds but might not be able to prevent the traffickers from harming children in those crucial moments. "Let the children go," Sarah said, positioning herself between the traffickers and as many children as possible. "This is over. The FBI has surrounded the building and there's no way out." Hayes tightened his grip on Emma, who was crying and calling for Sarah to help her. "We've got hostages," Hayes shouted toward the basement ceiling, apparently believing FBI listening devices were recording everything. "If you try to breach this building, we'll kill every one of these kids." But Sarah's FBI experience had taught her that hostage situations involving child victims required immediate action, not negotiation. Traffickers who were cornered had already demonstrated their willingness to harm children, and their desperation would only increase as tactical teams prepared to enter the building. The sound of the front door being breached echoed through the basement, followed by the tactical team's shouted commands. "FBI, everyone on the ground, now!" Sarah used the distraction to launch herself at Hayes, using combat techniques she had learned during her military service to break his hold on Emma and push the child toward the other victims who were huddled together in terror. Her movement triggered chaos as the other traffickers realized their situation was hopeless and began either fighting or attempting to flee. Morrison pulled a handgun from his waistband and fired twice in Sarah's direction, the shots echoing deafeningly in the confined basement space. Sarah felt the impact of the first bullet striking her left shoulder, spinning her around, but not incapacitating her. Her military training had prepared her for being wounded in combat, and she used her momentum to tackle Morrison before he could fire again. FBI tactical agents poured down the basement stairs, their tactical lights and laser sights cutting through the darkness as they began the complex process of separating victims from perpetrators in a chaotic, dangerous environment. Sarah heard Agent Santos's voice over the tactical radio. "We have children down here. I need medical teams immediately." The next several minutes were a blur of controlled chaos as FBI agents secured the basement, separated the children from their captors, and began providing emergency medical care. Sarah found herself being treated by an FBI medic for her gunshot wound, while simultaneously helping to calm the traumatized children who were crying and calling for their parents. Emma Rodriguez refused to leave Sarah's side, clinging to her despite the blood from her bullet wound. "Mrs. Chen, are we really going home now?" she asked through her tears. "Yes, baby, you're going home and you're never going to be hurt like this again, I promise." Agent Rodriguez appeared at Sarah's side as the medic was bandaging her shoulder wound. "The house is secure. We've arrested 4 individuals here and coordinated teams are executing warrants at 12 other locations across 3 states. Early reports suggest we've rescued over 40 children and arrested more than 20 adults." Sarah's recording equipment had continued functioning throughout the raid, providing prosecutors with documentation of the traffickers' statements about killing children and evidence of their willingness to use lethal force to protect their operation. Combined with the physical evidence seized from Morrison's house and the testimonies from rescued children, the case against the trafficking network would be overwhelming. Dr. Walsh, the FBI's child psychologist, arrived to begin the delicate process of interviewing the child victims and preparing them for reunification with their families. But her preliminary assessment was sobering. These children have been subjected to systematic psychological conditioning in addition to physical abuse. Recovery is going to be a long process, and some of them may never fully overcome the trauma they have experienced. As Sarah was being prepared for transport to the hospital, she watched FBI agents carefully documenting every aspect of Morrison's basement facility. The soundproof rooms, the surveillance equipment, the restraints and other implements of abuse, all of it would become evidence in what prosecutors were already calling one of the most comprehensive child trafficking cases in federal court history. Agent Santos rode with Sarah in the ambulance, providing updates on the coordinated raids happening across 3 states. "It's incredible, Sarah. Your investigation has uncovered a network that was operating in at least 8 different communities. We've identified victims from 4 different school districts, and we're finding evidence of trafficking activities going back more than 3 years." The scope of the operation was staggering, but what struck Sarah most was the realization that without her accidental discovery of Emma Rodriguez's disturbing artwork, dozens of children would have continued suffering while their abusers maintained positions of trust and authority in their communities. "How did they recruit so many people without being detected?" Sarah asked, still struggling to understand how such a large criminal network had operated undetected for so long. They were careful to recruit people who already had legitimate access to children, teachers, coaches, counselors, even some parents. And they used positions of authority to discourage questions. Who's going to suspect a principal or a youth counselor of trafficking children? They hid in plain sight by using their professional credibility as cover. As the ambulance pulled into the hospital, Sarah reflected on the strange path that had brought her from military service to FBI work, to teaching, and finally to the most important mission of her career. Her transition to civilian life had been intended to provide peace and distance from the violence and trauma of her federal law enforcement career. Instead, she had stumbled into a situation that required every skill she had developed over 2 decades of military and FBI service. Her ability to recognize behavioral patterns had identified the initial victims. Her training in surveillance and intelligence gathering had uncovered the trafficking network. Her experience with dangerous undercover operations had enabled her to gather the evidence needed for prosecution. And her military combat training had helped her protect the children during the final confrontation. But most importantly, her decision to become a teacher had put her in a position to notice when children needed protection. The career change that was supposed to represent retirement from law enforcement had instead led her to the most significant child rescue operation of her career.
3 days after Operation Guardian Shield, Sarah sat in a private room at Virginia Commonwealth University Medical Center, her left arm in a sling, but her attention focused on the continuous stream of updates from Agent Santos about the ongoing investigation. The coordinated raids across 3 states had been even more successful than anyone had initially hoped. Final count is 47 arrests, Santos reported, consulting her tablet as she updated Sarah on the operation's results. "We've rescued 53 children ranging in age from 4 to 14. The network was operating in 12 different communities, with participants including school administrators, teachers, youth sports coaches, counselors, and even several law enforcement officers." The revelation that some police officers had been part of the trafficking network explained how the operation had avoided detection for so long. The corrupted officers had access to investigative reports, could suppress complaints about suspicious activities, and could warn other network members about potential law enforcement interest. "What about the children?" Sarah asked, her primary concern focused on the victims rather than the criminal prosecutions. Dr. Walsh entered the room carrying files that contained preliminary psychological assessments of the rescued children. "The recovery process is going to be complex and long-term. Many of these children were conditioned to believe that the abuse was either normal or therapeutic. Some were told that their families had abandoned them and that the traffickers were their new caretakers. The psychological manipulation had been as sophisticated as the physical operation. Children were systematically isolated from their support systems, convinced that they were willing participants in activities they didn't understand, and threatened to harm to their families if they revealed what was happening to them. Emma Rodriguez has been asking for you," Dr. Walsh continued. "Her mother would like you to visit when you're feeling up to it. Emma has been telling everyone that Mrs. Chen saved her from the monsters."
Sarah's recovery was complicated by the fact that her gunshot wound was healing well, but the psychological impact of witnessing systematic child abuse was proving more difficult to process. Her years in military combat and FBI investigations had exposed her to human cruelty before, but the trafficking operation represented a level of calculated evil that was affecting her more deeply than previous cases. Agent Rodriguez arrived with federal prosecutors who needed Sarah's testimony to ensure successful convictions for all 47 arrested individuals. The evidence she had gathered was crucial, but her first-hand witness testimony about the trafficking operation would be essential for proving the most serious charges. "The recordings you made are incredible," Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Palmer explained. "We have Hayes and Morrison on tape discussing victim selection, describing their therapeutic methods, and threatening to kill the children when the tactical teams arrived. But your testimony about what you observed in that basement will be what convinces juries that these weren't misguided individuals who thought they were helping children. These were predators who knew exactly what they were doing." The legal proceedings would be complex, with separate trials for different aspects of the criminal network. Some defendants would face federal trafficking charges, others would be prosecuted for child abuse, and several would be charged with conspiracy and racketeering for their roles in organizing the network. But Sarah's focus remained on the children. Over the following weeks, she visited several of the rescued victims and their families, helping to provide continuity and reassurance during their recovery process. Her unique position as both the teacher who had discovered the abuse and the federal agent who had rescued them made her a crucial figure in their healing process. Emma Rodriguez's reunion with her mother was particularly emotional. Maria Rodriguez had been working double shifts as a single parent and had trusted Principal Hayes' assurances that Emma was participating in beneficial after-school programs. The guilt and trauma of learning that her daughter had been systematically abused while she thought Emma was receiving educational support was devastating. "I trusted him," Maria sobbed during one of Sarah's visits. "He was the principal. He was supposed to protect our children, and instead he was... I can't even say it. How do I explain Emma that the adults she was supposed to trust were the ones hurting her?" Sarah drew on her experience with trauma victims to help both Maria and Emma begin the recovery process. Emma's going to need professional counseling, but she also needs to know that what happened to her wasn't her fault and that the adults who hurt her are going to prison for the rest of their lives. The community impact of the trafficking network's exposure was profound. Riverside Elementary was temporarily closed while investigators examined personnel files and interviewed staff members to ensure no other predators had infiltrated the school system. Parents throughout the district struggled with the realization that their trust in educational institutions had been exploited by criminals who specifically targeted vulnerable children. Sarah found herself in the unexpected position of being both a local hero and a reminder of the community's vulnerability. News media coverage of Operation Guardian Shield focused on her unique background as a former FBI agent who had uncovered the trafficking network, but Sarah insisted that interviews focus on child safety rather than her personal story. "The important thing isn't what I did," she told a reporter from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. "The important thing is that parents and teachers learn to recognize the warning signs of abuse and trafficking. Children's safety depends on adults being willing to ask difficult questions and take action when something doesn't seem right." Her words proved prophetic. Within weeks of Operation Guardian Shield's success, school districts across Virginia implemented new training programs for identifying signs of child abuse. Parents became more vigilant about their children's activities and relationships with authority figures. And most importantly, children learned that they could report abuse to trusted adults who would believe them and take action to protect them. The ripple effects extended beyond Virginia. Law enforcement agencies across the country began re-examining cases involving missing children or reports of suspicious activities around schools and youth programs. Several additional trafficking networks were identified and dismantled as a direct result of intelligence gathered during Operation Guardian Shield. But perhaps the most significant impact was on Sarah herself. Her experience with the trafficking case had reminded her that her unique combination of military, federal law enforcement, and educational backgrounds positioned her to make contributions that others couldn't.
Rather than representing retirement from public service, her teaching career had become a new form of service that was potentially more important than anything she had done before. 6 months after the raid on Morrison's house, Sarah received a phone call from FBI Director Janet Morrison. "Agent Chen, I have a proposition for you. We're creating a new unit focused on identifying and dismantling child trafficking networks that operate within educational and youth service organizations. We need someone with your specific expertise to lead the unit." Sarah looked around her hospital room, which had become her temporary office as she recovered and prepared for the upcoming trials. The walls were covered with thank you cards from rescued children and their families, photos from Emma Rodriguez's art class where she was once again drawing pictures of rainbows and happy families, and commendation letters from law enforcement agencies across the country. "Director Morrison, I'm honored by the offer, but I need to ask about something first. Would this new unit allow me to continue teaching? Because I think some of our best intelligence about threats to children is going to come from people who work with children every day." The director's response would determine whether Sarah's accidental discovery of a trafficking network would become the foundation for a new approach to protecting children.
Director Morrison's response exceeded Sarah's expectations. "Actually, Agent Chen, we were hoping you would suggest exactly that approach. We want to establish a new FBI Child Protection Intelligence Network that embeds federal agents in educational environments while maintaining their teaching credentials. You would be the pilot program." The concept was revolutionary. Federal agents working as teachers, coaches, and counselors in schools across the country, using their positions to identify potential threats to children while providing genuine educational services. Sarah's success in uncovering the Virginia trafficking network had demonstrated that law enforcement personnel with direct access to children could detect abuse patterns that traditional investigative methods might miss. "We're calling it the Guardian Angel program," Director Morrison continued. "Agents would undergo full teacher certification and work in school districts that have been identified as high risk for child exploitation activities. But they would also have direct communication channels to federal investigative resources and tactical response teams." Sarah realized that her unique career path, from military intelligence to FBI profiling to elementary school teaching, had accidentally created the perfect prototype for a new approach to child protection. Her combination of investigative skills and educational training had enabled her to recognize abuse indicators that others might miss, while her position as a teacher had provided access to potential victims that traditional law enforcement couldn't achieve. Over the following months, Sarah worked with FBI administrators and Department of Education officials to design the Guardian Angel program. The initiative would require careful coordination between federal law enforcement and local school districts, with participating agents undergoing extensive background checks and psychological evaluations to ensure they were suitable for working with children. The program's first major test case came 8 months after Operation Guardian Shield, when Sarah was assigned to investigate reports of suspicious activities at a middle school in North Carolina. Working undercover as a substitute art teacher, she began the same process of observation and behavioral analysis that had uncovered the Virginia trafficking network. Within 3 weeks, Sarah had identified patterns that suggested another organized abuse ring was targeting students from the middle school. This time, however, she had the support of a full FBI task force from the beginning, along with protocols that had been developed based on lessons learned from the Virginia operation. The North Carolina investigation resulted in the arrest of 12 individuals and the rescue of 19 children. But more importantly, it validated the effectiveness of the Guardian Angel approach. Sarah's position as a teacher had allowed her to observe subtle behavioral changes in students, build trust with potential victims, and gather intelligence that would have been impossible to obtain through traditional surveillance methods. "The numbers speak for themselves," Agent Santos told Sarah during a briefing about the Guardian Angel program's expansion. In 18 months, agents working undercover in educational environments have identified and dismantled 7 different child exploitation networks, rescued over 200 children, and arrested 127 individuals. The program is being requested by school districts across the country. But the program's success created new challenges. The FBI had to carefully balance the need for undercover operations with the requirement to maintain honest relationships with school communities. Parents and teachers needed to trust that their schools were safe environments, while also understanding that some level of surveillance was necessary to protect children from predators who specifically targeted educational institutions. Sarah found herself testifying before congressional committees about the Guardian Angel program, explaining how her accidental discovery of abuse in Emma Rodriguez's artwork had led to the development of a new federal approach to child protection. The most important thing we've learned, Sarah told the House Judiciary Committee, is that protecting children requires adults who are willing to pay attention to subtle changes in behavior and trust their instincts when something doesn't seem right. Children often communicate distress through their actions and artwork before they're able to verbally report abuse. Emma Rodriguez, now thriving in 5th grade and participating in advanced art programs, had become an unofficial spokesperson for child abuse survivors. Her recovery from the trauma of trafficking had been remarkable, aided by intensive therapy and the knowledge that her courage in creating artwork that reflected her experiences had ultimately led to the rescue of dozens of other children. I want other kids to know that if bad things are happening to them, they should tell their teachers or draw pictures about it. Mrs. Chen saw my scary pictures and saved me and all my friends, Emma said during a recorded interview that was used in educational materials about recognizing signs of child abuse. The Guardian Angel program expanded to include partnerships with youth sports organizations, summer camps, and other programs that served children. Sarah's role evolved from undercover agent to program administrator, training new Guardian Angel agents and developing protocols for different types of child-serving organizations. 5 years after Operation Guardian Shield, Sarah stood in her FBI office in Quantico, surrounded by case files representing successful child rescue operations across the United States. The Guardian Angel program had become a permanent part of federal law enforcement strategy, with over 200 agents working undercover in educational and youth service environments. Her military medals and FBI commendations now shared wall space with thank you letters from rescued children, certificates of appreciation from school districts, and photographs from graduation ceremonies of students whose lives had been saved by Guardian Angel operations. But the item she treasured most was a simple drawing from Emma Rodriguez, now a confident teenager who planned to become an art therapist to help other trauma survivors. The picture showed a woman in both a military uniform and a teacher's outfit, surrounded by children who were safe, happy, and protected. At the bottom, in Emma's careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you, Mrs. Chen, for being our guardian angel." Sarah's journey from military service to FBI profiler to elementary school teacher had accidentally prepared her for the most important mission of her career, creating a new way to protect the most vulnerable members of society. The Guardian Angel program represented a fundamental shift in how law enforcement approached child protection. From a reactive investigation of crimes after they occurred to proactive prevention through embedded intelligence gathering. Operation Guardian Shield had begun with one teacher noticing that a student's artwork reflected trauma, but it had evolved into a national program that had rescued hundreds of children and prevented countless cases of abuse. Sarah's unique background had enabled her to bridge the gap between law enforcement and education, creating a new model for protecting children that combined the expertise of both fields. As she prepared to brief the next class of Guardian Angel recruits, Sarah reflected on the unexpected path that had brought her to this moment. Her retirement from federal law enforcement lasted exactly 2 years before circumstances thrust her back into the most challenging and rewarding work of her career.
But this time, instead of hunting criminals after they had committed their crimes, she was working to identify and stop them before they could harm children. The Guardian Angel program represented more than just a new law enforcement initiative. It was a recognition that protecting children required adults who were willing to be present in their daily lives, observant of their needs, and prepared to take action when something didn't seem right. Sarah's accidental discovery of a trafficking network had shown that sometimes the most important intelligence came not from sophisticated surveillance technology, but from caring adults who paid attention to the children in their care.
10 years after Operation Guardian Shield, Sarah Chen stood before the graduating class at the FBI National Academy in Quantico, delivering the keynote address to 247 new federal agents who would be joining the Bureau's Child Protection Division. Among the graduates were 12 new Guardian Angel agents who would be embedded in school districts across America, carrying forward the mission that had begun with a simple art teacher's observation of disturbing drawings. When I first noticed changes in Emma Rodriguez's artwork, Sarah told the assembled graduates, I had no idea that her crayon drawings of shadows and hiding places would lead to the rescue of over 800 children and the dismantling of trafficking networks in 42 states. But that's exactly what happened, because sometimes the most important intelligence comes from the smallest voices. Voices that speak through art, behavior changes, and the trust they place in adults who are willing to listen. The Guardian Angel program had evolved far beyond Sarah's original undercover teaching assignment. The FBI now maintained a network of over 500 agents working in educational environments nationwide, supported by specialized training programs, advanced communication technology, and rapid response protocols that could mobilize rescue teams within minutes of identifying threatened children. But perhaps more importantly, the program had fundamentally changed how American society approached child protection. Teachers across the country now received mandatory training in recognizing signs of abuse and trafficking. School districts implemented new protocols for background checks and ongoing monitoring of staff members. And parents learned to have conversations with their children about recognizing inappropriate behavior from authority figures. Emma Rodriguez, now 22 and working as a licensed art therapist at a children's trauma recovery center in Richmond, served as a living testament to the power of early intervention and comprehensive support for abuse survivors. Her recovery had been remarkable, aided not only by professional therapy, but by the knowledge that her courage in expressing her trauma through art had ultimately protected hundreds of other children. I keep some of my old drawings from when I was being hurt, Emma said during a recent interview for a documentary about the Guardian Angel program. Not because I want to remember the bad times, but because I want to remember how art saved my life. Mrs. Chen, Agent Chen, saw what I was trying to say when I couldn't find the words. Now I help other kids find their voices too. The ripple effects of Operation Guardian Shield continued to expand in ways Sarah had never anticipated. The Virginia trafficking case had led to congressional hearings that resulted in new federal legislation increasing penalties for child trafficking and providing additional funding for victim recovery programs. The case had also sparked international cooperation efforts, with law enforcement agencies in 12 countries adopting Guardian Angel-style programs to combat child exploitation. Sarah's personal journey had come full circle in unexpected ways. Her military service had taught her patterns and threats. Her FBI career had honed her investigative skills and understanding of criminal behavior. Her transition to teaching had put her in position to identify vulnerable children. And her accidental discovery of the trafficking network had led to the creation of a new field that combined all of her expertise in service of child protection. But the most meaningful aspect of her work remained the individual children whose lives had been saved. Sarah maintained contact with many of the survivors from Operation Guardian Shield and subsequent Guardian Angel operations. She had attended graduations, weddings, and celebrations marking major milestones in the lives of young people who might not have survived without intervention. Marcus Thompson, one of the children rescued from Morrison's basement, had become a police officer, specializing in youth outreach programs. The Johnson twins had both pursued careers in social work, focusing on family preservation and abuse prevention. Their recovery stories served as inspiration for other survivors and proof that comprehensive support could help children overcome even the most severe trauma. What we learned from Operation Guardian Shield, Sarah told the FBI graduates, is that protecting children isn't just about catching criminals after they commit crimes. It's about being present in children's daily lives, recognizing when something isn't right, and having the courage to ask difficult questions even when the answers might be uncomfortable. The Guardian Angel program had also sparked innovations in other areas of child protection. Technology companies had developed new tools for analyzing children's digital communications to identify potential grooming or exploitation. Mental health professionals had created specialized treatment protocols for trafficking survivors. And educational institutions had implemented new curricula teaching children about recognizing and reporting inappropriate behavior from adults. Sarah's office at FBI headquarters was filled with artifacts from a decade of Guardian Angel operations. Photographs from successful rescue missions, thank you letters from survivors and their families, and awards recognizing the program's contribution to child safety. But the item she valued most was still Emma Rodriguez's original drawing, the crayon picture of a small figure hiding from shadows that had started everything. As she concluded her address to the new FBI graduates, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from military battlefields to suburban classrooms to the forefront of national child protection policy. Each phase of her career had prepared her for the next, creating a unique combination of skills and experiences that had enabled her to recognize and respond to threats that others might have missed. Your mission as Guardian Angel agents, she told the graduates, is not just to gather intelligence or make arrests. Your mission is to be the trusted adult that every child deserves. Someone who pays attention, someone who listens, someone who believes them when they find the courage to ask for help. Sometimes that help comes in the form of recognizing trauma expressed through artwork. Sometimes it comes from noticing behavior changes that others dismiss. And sometimes it comes from simply being present in a child's life during the moments when they need protection most. The ceremony concluded with the Guardian Angel Oath, words that Sarah had written based on her experience with Emma Rodriguez and the other children of Operation Guardian Shield. I solemnly swear to protect the innocent, to listen with my heart as well as my training, to recognize that the smallest voice may carry the most important message, and to never forget that every child deserves a guardian angel. As the new agents dispersed to their assignments across the country, Sarah felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing her accidental discovery of abuse had evolved into a permanent institution dedicated to child protection. The Guardian Angel program would continue long after her own retirement, creating a legacy of safety and vigilance that would protect generations of children from those who would harm them. Emma Rodriguez's final drawing had shown adults and children together in a world where trust was possible because protection was real. Through the Guardian Angel program, that vision was becoming reality, one school, one child, and one caring adult at a time. The story that began with a military intelligence officer's transition to teaching had become a nationwide movement, demonstrating that protecting children required not just good intentions, but also the skills, training, and institutional support necessary to recognize threats and respond effectively when intervention was needed. Sarah's journey from Major Chen to Agent Chen to Mrs. Chen and back to Agent Chen had shown that sometimes the most important missions choose us, arriving disguised as routine assignments or career changes, waiting for us to have the wisdom and courage to recognize their true significance. Operation Guardian Shield had ended with the arrest of 47 predators in 1 week. But its true legacy was the creation of a system ensuring that no child's cry for help, whether expressed through words, behavior, or artwork, would ever go unnoticed again.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.